Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
Where we're going to be talking about, well, the way we work.
Exactly.
We're going to be exploring a concept called Teal organizations.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using Frederic Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations,
Okay.
as our guide.
Right.
And what's really cool is that we're using the illustrated version of this book.
I love that version.
So it's going to make things a lot more interesting
It's so much more accessible.
than, your typical dry management book.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
what's really compelling about Laloux's work is that he doesn't just critique the traditional corporate world. He actually offers this completely new framework for structuring and running organizations.
It's refreshing, isn't it?
Yeah, and this model is called Teal.
Yes.
And it draws a fascinating parallel between organizations and living systems.
Which is so cool. I love that analogy.
So before we get into the details of how these Teal organizations actually work,
Okay.
Laloux paints kind of a sobering picture
Yeah.
of why we even need this reinvention in the first place.
Right.
And I mean, we've all been there, right?
We've all experienced it.
We've all experienced the soul-crushing bureaucracy, the endless power struggles, and, just that feeling of being a cog in a giant machine.
It's dehumanizing in a way.
Yeah, and to make things worse,
Right.
Laloux doesn't just tell anecdotes.
Yeah.
He actually backs it up with data.
That's right.
And there was this Gallup poll from back in 2013 that found that only 13%
Whoa.
of employees
That's such a small number.
globally felt engaged at work.
That's really telling.
That's a really small number.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
It's a really tiny fraction.
It is.
And it's a sign that this traditional way of doing things is just not working.
It's not.
It's just not working for most people.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about historical shifts in power structures. Like, we went from monarchies to democracies.
Right.
So why are we still stuck in these rigid hierarchies at work?
Interesting question.
You know what I mean?
I do.
It seems kind of backwards.
It does seem like we should have evolved beyond that by now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it,
Right.
new ideas for organizing ourselves have always faced resistance.
That's true.
Imagine
It's
trying to
different.
explain democracy a few centuries ago.
People would have looked at you like you were crazy.
They would have thought you were nuts.
Right.
Like, how can people govern themselves?
Exactly.
But those seemingly radical ideas eventually transformed society.
They did.
And what Laloux is saying
Yeah.
is that a similar transformation is happening now in the world of work.
It's an exciting time to be thinking about these things.
Yeah. And to help us visualize this, right? Lowe uses a color-coded system
Okay.
to illustrate the different stages of how we've organized ourselves throughout history.
Interesting.
And he starts with red organizations,
Red. Okay.
which are very impulsive and power-driven.
Okay.
Think of a wolf pack.
Got it.
That's the kind of dynamic we're talking about.
Survival of the fittest.
Then we move to amber,
Amber.
which is all about rigid rules and hierarchies.
Okay.
Think of a traditional army,
I'm with you.
very top-down.
Yeah.
Then comes orange,
Orange.
which is the dominant model in today's business world.
Right.
And this is where a lot of us find ourselves today.
Right.
It prioritizes achievement,
Okay.
competition,
Yeah.
and of course, profit.
Makes sense.
And then we have green organizations,
Green.
which are often seen as more progressive. They focus on values, empowerment,
Right.
and creating a more positive work environment.
Sounds good so far.
Yeah, but here's the catch.
Okay.
Even green organizations often get stuck
Oh.
because they're still clinging to that hierarchical structure.
So they're not really breaking free from the old model.
Right.
Okay.
So you have this kind of weird mix of trying to be egalitarian
Right.
while still operating within a power pyramid.
It's a contradiction.
And this leads to a lot of confusion and power games.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
So even companies trying to do things differently are still falling short
they are.
in some ways.
Which brings us to
Yeah.
Teal organizations.
Teal. Okay.
This new model
Yeah.
aims to move beyond the limitations of all those previous stages.
Interesting. So it's like a whole new level
It is.
of organizational consciousness.
The whole new way of thinking about work.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So tell me more about these Teal organizations.
Well, they embrace 3 key breakthroughs:
Okay.
self-management,
Self-management.
wholeness, and what Laloux calls
Yeah.
evolutionary purpose.
No evolutionary purpose. Okay.
Lots to unpack there.
There is.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be great to dive into like a real world example
Yeah. Let's see it in action.
just to see how this actually plays out.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite case study from the book
I do.
that illustrates these principles?
Absolutely.
Okay.
One that comes to mind is Buurtzorg.
Buurtzorg.
It's a Dutch home care organization.
Okay.
And they've become a model for how Teal principles can lead to
Yeah.
incredible results,
Okay.
both for the organization and the people who work there.
All right. I'm ready to hear more about Buurtzorg.
Let's dive in.
Buurtzorg, a home care organization.
Right.
This is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I mean, healthcare is notorious for
Yeah.
burnout and high turnover.
It is.
It feels like the system is designed to
Yeah.
drain the passion out of caring professions.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to hear how Buurtzorg is doing things differently.
Well, their story starts back in the 1980s
Okay.
when the Dutch government decided to push for more efficiency
Okay.
in home care.
Efficiency sounds good in theory,
It does.
but I have a feeling this might not have worked out so well.
It kind of backfired.
Ah,
Larger organizations were formed.
okay.
Nurses were forced to specialize in
Right.
very narrow tasks.
Oh.
And everything became about metrics and numbers.
Uh-huh.
They even had nurses scanning barcodes
Really?
on patients' doors
Wow.
to track their time.
That sounds pretty...
Impersonal.
The
Yeah.
system became very impersonal,
Yeah.
transactional.
Which I imagine led to some problems.
It did.
Okay.
Patient and nurse satisfaction plummeted.
Yeah.
It became the opposite of what you want
Mm.
in a caring profession.
So how did Buurtzorg break out of this?
They completely flipped the script.
Instead of these large impersonal organizations,
Yeah.
they created self-managing teams
Yeah.
of 10 to 12 nurses.
Small teams.
And get this, no manager.
Hold on, no managers at all.
Nope.
That's pretty radical.
It is.
Wouldn't that lead to chaos?
That's what a lot of people think.
Yeah.
But they replaced the traditional hierarchy
Okay.
with a system based on trust, transparency,
Okay.
and distributed decision-making.
So it's not anarchy.
Right.
It's about shifting the locus of control.
Exactly.
But I'm still curious about the practicalities.
Okay.
Like, how do they make sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah.
How do they coordinate care
And
without a manager?
they use what's called the advice process,
Advice process.
which is a core element
Okay.
of self-management in Teal organizations.
Okay.
So let me walk you through how it works.
Okay.
Imagine a nurse
Mm-hmm.
needs to make a decision, maybe about a patient's care plan
Okay.
or about purchasing equipment.
So let's
Yeah.
say they need to buy a new piece of equipment
Okay.
for a patient.
Before making that decision,
Yeah.
they're required to seek advice from
Right.
two key groups.
Okay.
First, they need to consult with
Okay.
experts on the topic.
Okay. So other nurses in this case.
It could be other nurses who
Yeah.
have experience with that equipment, or
Mhm.
maybe a medical supply specialist.
So they're tapping into the collective wisdom.
Exactly,
Of the-
colleagues. And the second group
Okay.
they need to consult with
Yeah.
is anyone who will be affected
Okay.
by the decision.
So that could be the patient,
It could be the patient,
their family,
family members.
other nurses who will be using the equipment.
That makes sense.
So it's not just about
Ah.
gathering information from experts.
Mm-hmm.
It's also about making sure
Yeah.
the decision is aligned.
Yeah. With the needs and perspectives of everyone involved.
That's really interesting.
But what if the advice they receive is conflicting?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Who gets the final say?
Yeah.
Ultimately, the nurse who initiated the process
Okay.
makes the final decision.
Okay.
But the key is
Yeah.
they have to genuinely consider all the advice.
They can't just ignore it.
They can't just cherry pick
Right.
the advice that supports their pre-existing idea.
Yeah.
And this system creates a natural form of accountability.
Because they know.
Because everyone knows they'll
Right.
be on the receiving end of this advice process
Eventually.
at some point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's like built-in checks and balances, but based on trust
Yeah.
and transparency.
Rather than top-down control.
Exactly.
And I love that Buurtzorg didn't start out
Yeah.
with this fully formed system.
Right.
They evolved into it
They did, through trial and error,
through trial and error.
constantly adapting
Yeah.
and refining.
So it's not about rigidly following a blueprint.
It's about embracing
Yeah.
an iterative process
Yeah.
of learning and improvement.
I like that.
Which brings us back to
Oh.
one of the core principles of Teal organizations.
Okay.
This idea of an organization
Yeah.
as a living, evolving system.
So instead of trying to control every aspect,
Right.
you're creating the conditions
Yeah.
for self-organization.
And emergence.
It's like tending a garden.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
Instead of building a machine.
And Bertzour's approach
It
produced some incredible results.
incredible result.
Not only do they have
Yeah.
high patient and nurse satisfaction,
Consistently.
but they also save the healthcare system money.
It's a win-win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
for everyone.
But I have to admit,
Yeah.
I'm still a little skeptical
Okay.
about how this self-management thing would play out in other contexts.
Right?
Like, what about compensation?
That's a great question.
How do you handle salaries and bonuses
Yeah.
when there's no traditional hierarchy?
It's another area where Teal organizations challenge conventional wisdom.
Right.
Many of them have moved away
Yeah.
from individual incentives and bonuses altogether.
Okay, I can already hear the cynics saying,
I know.
good luck finding people
Right.
who are that intrinsically motivated.
Yeah, but Laloux provides some real-world examples
Okay.
to back this up.
Give me an example.
One of the most compelling
Okay.
is Morningstar,
Morningstar,
the world's largest tomato processing company.
the tomato folks.
Yes.
Okay, so how do they handle salaries?
They have this interesting system
Yeah.
called the collegial letter process.
Collegial letter process.
Essentially,
Okay.
each employee writes a letter
Okay.
proposing their own salary.
Hold on. They just decide how
Yeah.
much they want to get paid.
It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
The letter has to be supported by evidence of their contributions,
Okay.
their plans for the coming year, and feedback from colleagues.
So it's like a self-assessment,
Yeah.
but with peer review.
Exactly.
Good.
And they have salary panels
Okay.
made up of colleagues
Okay.
who review the letters and provide feedback.
So there is some oversight.
There is
Oh,
to
no.
ensure fairness and accountability.
I love that they call them salary panels
Yeah.
instead of compensation committees or something.
It's more human,
It is.
more approachable.
Yeah,
And this system actually works.
it does.
Morningstar has been incredibly successful,
Wow.
both financially
Okay.
and in terms of employee satisfaction.
It's amazing to think
It is.
that a company that large
Mm-hmm.
can operate without traditional management structures
Right.
and still thrive.
And thrive.
Yeah.
It really challenges our assumptions
It does.
about how organizations need to be run.
Yeah. And that brings us to another crucial breakthrough
Okay.
of Teal organizations,
Yeah.
the emphasis on wholeness.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in this
Yeah.
because I think
Mhm.
it speaks to a deep longing
It does.
that so many of us have.
Yeah.
This desire to bring our full selves to work,
Yes.
to be seen and appreciated for who we are,
Absolutely.
beyond just our job titles.
Yeah, it's about creating a culture
Yeah.
of trust,
Yeah.
respect, and psychological safety,
Where people feel comfortable,
where people feel comfortable
being vulnerable
being vulnerable
and authentic.
and authentic.
But how do you actually create that kind of culture?
What?
Seems like it would require more than just
It does.
free snacks and ping pong tables.
It's about more than perks.
Yeah.
The book highlights some really interesting practices
Oh, like what?
that Teal organizations use
Yeah.
to foster this sense of wholeness.
Give me some examples.
Some organizations start meetings
Okay.
with a moment of silence
Okay.
or a practice of sharing gratitude stories.
I like that.
Others have created designated spaces for
Right.
reflection and contemplation,
I love that.
like acknowledging that
Yeah.
we need time and space
Yeah.
to reconnect with ourselves,
Even during a busy workday.
even in the midst of a busy workday.
Yeah.
Some organizations use
Yeah.
really unique practices,
Like what?
like using tingsha bells
Kingsha bells.
to bring awareness
Okay.
to ego-driven behaviors
Okay.
during meetings.
I'm imagining a very different kind of meeting.
It's a way of gently interrupting
Oh.
patterns of dominance and control,
Okay.
and reminding people to listen
Yeah.
with open hearts and minds.
And this isn't just about creating
No,
a nice or fluffy work environment.
it's not.
There's a strategic advantage
There's a real strategic
to
advantage.
fostering wholeness.
Yeah.
Okay? How so?
When people feel safe to be themselves, to express their creativity, to bring their unique perspective to the table, you unlock a level of innovation and collaboration.
That's not possible in a traditional setting.
That you just don't see
Yeah.
in a more traditional hierarchical setting.
So it's not just about feeling good.
It's about tapping into the
Yeah.
full potential of individuals and teams.
And that brings us to the third breakthrough
Yes.
of Teal organization.
The third breakthrough.
Evolutionary purpose.
Evolutionary purpose.
This one has always intrigued me,
Yeah.
but I'll admit, I'm still a bit fuzzy
Okay.
on what it means.
It's about shifting from a mindset
Okay.
of predicting and controlling
Okay.
to a mindset of sensing and responding.
So instead of rigidly following a 5-year plan,
Right.
you're more adaptable and responsive.
To emerging opportunities and challenges.
Exactly.
Laloux uses this great analogy of riding a bicycle
A bicycle.
to illustrate this.
Okay.
Imagine trying to ride a bike by rigidly following a predetermined plan,
Calculating every turn.
calculating every turn of the handlebars.
You'd probably crash.
You'd probably crash.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very effective.
No,
Or enjoyable.
not at all.
When we ride a bike,
Yeah,
we're constantly
Okay.
sensing
yeah,
and responding
yeah.
to the environment.
So what's happening around us,
We adjust our balance,
our speed,
our speed, our direction
what we're experiencing.
in the moment.
In the moment.
And Teal organizations operate
Yes,
in a similar way.
they do.
So they're like skilled cyclists.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Constantly adjusting
Yeah.
and adapting
Yeah.
to stay on course.
But also open to
Yeah,
new paths.
on new paths.
And unexpected discoveries
And
along the way.
it allows for serendipity
I love that.
and innovation.
But how does this
Mhm.
actually play out
right,
in the real world?
yeah.
Do Teal organizations just ditch
Not necessarily.
all forms of planning?
They might still create budgets or forecasts,
Okay.
but they see them as flexible guidelines
Okay.
rather than rigid mandates.
So it's about
It is.
embracing a more fluid
Yes,
and adaptive approach,
to work.
which makes sense
It does.
in today's rapidly changing
We
world.
can't predict the future,
You can't.
so we need to be able to adapt and evolve quickly.
And this sense and respond approach
Yeah.
applies not just to strategy,
Okay.
but also to change management,
Oh, change management.
which can be such a headache.
It can be such a nightmare.
In traditional organizations,
It's like trying to turn a giant ship around in a bathtub.
it's a nightmare.
But Teal organizations
Yes,
embrace change
they do.
as a natural and continuous process.
They don't need
Okay.
elaborate change management programs because change is woven into the fabric of their culture,
It's less about managing change.
and more about creating an environment
Yes.
where change is embraced
Exactly.
and even celebrated.
And even celebrate.
So it's about trusting people
Trusting people to adapt
and evolve
and evolve as needed,
as needed, rather than trying to
rather than trying to control
control everything.
every aspect of the process.
So what does this mean for leaders
That's a great question.
who are inspired by this model?
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay,
Each Teal journey is unique.
okay, but are there any
But there are
essential ingredients?
a few essential ingredients.
Okay, let's hear it.
First and foremost,
Okay,
there needs to be a leader,
okay,
typically the CEO,
okay,
who deeply understands
okay.
and embodies Teal principles.
So it starts with
It does
leadership buy-in.
at the highest level.
Yeah.
And the second essential ingredient
Okay.
is a board or equivalent governing body that supports this transformation.
So a supportive board is key.
It's crucial because Teal principles often challenge
Yeah.
traditional power dynamics.
Okay, so strong leadership
Yes.
and a supportive board
Those are the starting points.
are key starting points.
But for those of us
Yeah.
who aren't in the CEO seat,
Yeah.
what can we do
Yeah. What can we do?
to bring more of this Teal spirit
Yeah.
into our own work and teams?
Well, Laloux suggests
He does.
starting by identifying
Yeah.
the areas that resonate
The areas that resonate
most deeply with you.
most deeply.
Is it self-management?
Self-management,
Is it wholeness?
wholeness,
Is it evolutionary purpose?
evolutionary purpose.
So it's about finding
It's about finding your own entry point
your own entry point.
into this new way of working.
And it might start with
It might.
small experiments.
Small experiments.
Maybe you introduce the advice process to your team
Because
or create a more
Yes.
reflective and inclusive
Yes.
meeting culture.
It's about taking those baby steps
Babies.
and seeing what happens.
And Laloux reminds us
He does.
that while unlearning old habits takes effort,
it does.
Teal practices are often more intuitive and natural.
They often are.
Than traditional management methods.
It's like we're rediscovering a more human-centered way of working.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
That's been there all along.
So as we wrap up,
yeah,
this deep dive into reinventing organizations,
okay,
I'm left with a sense of both possibility and a healthy dose of reality.
Yeah.
Teal organizations offer a compelling alternative.
They do.
But it's clear that this transformation requires a profound shift.
A profound shift in mindset.
And a willingness to challenge.
And a willingness to challenge.
Deeply ingrained beliefs.
About how organizations should function.
And I think the most important takeaway for our listeners.
What is it?
Is that Teal principles are not just for organizations.
That's right.
They can be applied to any group or community.
To any group or community. So how might you bring more self-management?
More self-management.
Wholeness and purpose into your own life and work.
That's a powerful question.
That is a powerful question.
For all of us to ponder.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
On this deep dive.
As always.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences.
We would.
Feel free to connect with us on social media.
Yeah. Come join the conversation.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep reinventing. And keep believing in a better way to work.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about self-management and wholeness. Let's dive deeper into this idea of evolutionary purpose.
Okay.
I get that it's about being adaptable.
Right.
Like that cyclist.
Like riding a bike.
Yeah, but what does it actually mean for an organization to have an evolutionary purpose?
Well, it's so much more. It's in a mission statement taped on a wall.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of companies have mission statements.
They do.
But they don't always live up to them.
And most traditional organizations, even those with well-intentioned mission statements, are ultimately driven by self-preservation.
Okay.
It's all about competition, market share, squeezing out as much profit as possible.
And there's nothing inherently wrong?
Not at all.
With wanting to be successful.
Businesses need to be profitable.
Right.
To survive.
But Teal organizations operate from a different premise.
A different premise altogether.
They believe that organizations, like living organisms, have a natural direction.
A deeper purpose.
A deeper purpose that goes beyond. Just surviving. Or maximizing profits.
Maximizing profits.
So it's less about what the organization wants to achieve.
And more about what it's meant to become.
Yes.
Almost like it has its own destiny.
It's about tapping into that deeper sense of purpose.
Okay, but how do you discover?
That's a great question.
That evolutionary purpose.
It's a process.
Is it something you just intuit?
It's a process of deep listening, both internally and externally. It's about paying attention to what energizes and inspires people within the organization, and also being attuned to the needs of the world around you.
So aligning the internal drive with the external context.
The internal and the external.
But how does that translate into concrete actions? Do Teal organizations just throw out strategic plans and budgets?
Not necessarily.
And just go with the flow?
They might still use those tools, but in a very different way.
So instead of being rigid blueprints, plans and budgets become more like
guidelines. Adaptable to the ever-changing landscape.
So it's about embracing a more fluid and emergent approach
to strategy.
Instead of trying to predict the future 5 years out, you're constantly
sensing and responding
to
what's happening
right now. One of the best examples of this is Bertsorg again.
Bertsorg?
They've had phenomenal growth.
They have.
But it wasn't
part of some grand master plan.
So how did they grow?
They grew organically.
If they weren't following a strategic plan.
In response to the needs of their communities and the passion of their nurses.
So they were paying attention.
They were.
To what was happening on the ground. And then adapting their services.
To meet those needs.
To meet those emerging needs.
So they trusted their nurses.
They did.
To be the sensors.
To pick up on those signals from the community.
And instead of having to go through layers of bureaucracy to get approval for new initiative,
they empowered their nurses.
They empowered their nurses to experiment and innovate.
That's a very different way of thinking about...
The organization itself becomes a sensing organism, constantly evolving.
And adapting to its environment.
And
that brings us to another really interesting aspect of evolutionary purpose.
What's that?
This idea of letting go.
Letting go of control.
Of control.
Traditional organizations are obsessed with control.
They try to predict and manage.
They do.
Every outcome.
Which ultimately stifles innovation and creativity.
It's like they're trying to...
It's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. Forcing things to conform to their predetermined vision.
Teal organizations, on the other hand,
they do.
Embrace emergence.
They embrace emergence.
They create the conditions.
They create the conditions for self-organization.
And then
trust the process.
Trust the process to unfold.
So
it's a little bit chaotic.
It can seem that way.
But maybe it's actually a higher form of order.
A higher form of order.
Like from chaos comes creation.
That's a great way to think about it.
And one of the most radical examples in the book is FEI. The French metal foundry. They've essentially done away with...
They have.
Traditional budgets altogether.
No budgets?
No budgets.
Their philosophy is...
Wow. How does that even work?
Profitable not knowing how.
Profitable not knowing how.
Instead of creating detailed budgets for each department, they simply empower their teams to make decisions that are in the best interest of the company as a whole.
So it's about fostering collective responsibility.
Collective responsibility and trust. Rather than relying on top-down control.
And this has been successful.
It has.
They've consistently outperformed their competitors.
Wow.
And maintained a highly engaged workforce.
This is all so fascinating.
It is.
And inspiring.
Yeah.
But I think there's a part of me that's still wondering how realistic this is.
Right.
For most organizations.
Oh, I understand that.
I mean, Bert Zorg. Morningstar. FVI.
These are pretty unique examples.
They are pioneers.
Yeah.
They've paved the way.
But the principles
they embody are applicable to any organization.
Really?
Regardless of size, industry, or structure.
So it's not about copying.
It's not about copying what they've done. It's about understanding.
But understanding the principles.
The underlying principles.
And finding ways to apply them. In our own contexts.
In your own context.
And the beauty of the Teal model is that it's not
a rigid set of rules.
A rigid set of rules or practices.
It's a set of guiding principles.
It's more like a framework.
It is.
For thinking about work.
For thinking about work in a new way.
It's
not a prescriptive blueprint.
So for anyone who's feeling inspired, Laloux offers...
He does.
Some practical advice. On how to get started.
It all starts with awareness.
Okay.
The first step is to recognize that there's a different way of operating.
So challenging our assumptions. About how organizations should be run.
And once you've opened your mind.
To that possibility. The next step is to start experimenting.
Okay, so start small.
Don't
overhaul everything at once.
You don't have to do it all at once.
Maybe introduce the advice process.
You could.
Create more space for wholeness.
And authenticity.
In
your workplace.
It's about taking those baby steps. And seeing what happens and be patient.
Be patient and persistent. This is a journey.
It's a journey.
Your destination.
And you're not alone.
There's
a growing movement.
Of organizations
around the world that are embracing these principles. It's really exciting to think that we're on the cusp of
a new era of work.
That's
more human-centered.
More
purpose-driven.
And
ultimately more fulfilling. For everyone involved.
And I think the most important thing for our listeners to take away is that these principles are not just for organizations.
That's right. They can be applied.
To any aspect of our lives.
So I'll leave our listeners with this question.
Okay.
How might you bring?
How might you bring
more self-management,
wholeness and evolutionary purpose.
An evolutionary purpose.
Into your own life and work.
Into your own life and work. That's a powerful question.
That is a powerful question.
For all of us to ponder.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.
On this deep dive.
As always.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences.
We would
feel free to connect with us on social media.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
And keep reinventing.
Keep reinventing.